Welcome everybody, my name is Amy Dendradi and you are at the workshop entitled Moving from Idea to Proposal, which is the first of 4 grant writing workshops held this fall, sponsored by the University Grants Academy, which is a collaboration between the Office of Research and the Center of Faculty Development, and makes great use of our auxiliaries, which are the entities that work with us in grant writing and submitting grants, the Research Foundation and the Tower Foundation. And we'll introduce everybody in a minute. But the response to this opportunity was a little bit greater than we planned, which is why it feels a little scrunched in here. But if we have more people come in, I just want to assure you that when we get to the part of the workshop that involves doing some work, I've also reserved another room upstairs so that half of us can go up there and do the work, and then half can stay here, and the folks who are here to help and support you will move between floors. Okay. Sign-up sheet. Do we have, is there one over there?
No, I will get one after.
Okay. So please be sure to sign in before you leave this afternoon. There's 2 chairs up here and one over here. And the first hour, as you see, is being recorded. So if we remember, those of us who are up here may repeat your question if you ask it, just so that the question is captured on the audio. And all of our presenters are asked to speak quite loudly so that this picks up your voice. And then that video will be available online as a link for people who couldn't come this hour that they can watch. Okay. So what we're going to cover in this workshop after some introductions is just first talk about the purpose of this step in grant writing. So what we're going to be doing today is creating something called a proposal summary. It's a very brief 1 to 2 page distillation of your project idea that's written in a way that's super clear and concise. And we'll talk about why you might want to do that and what you would use it for. We'll talk about some of the elements that go into this that would be consistent regardless of who you're aiming at in terms of your funder. We'll give you some tools to get started on creating a proposal summary and some examples. And then you're going to actually have some time to do it. And we really encourage you to stay and do that work. Even if you just put down something very rough, then you have something to work with. And it's so much easier to work with something that's already there than start with a blank page. So if you do that, then you'll leave this workshop with a concrete product that's moving you forward in your proposal writing. And then after you go, half of you go up, please come back here at 2:45 and we'll talk about some next steps for you. Okay. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of people and units on campus that are contributing to this workshop series and to the University Grants Academy. So before we go further, I want some of those folks to introduce themselves and maybe say a little bit about your role in supporting grant writing on campus. So we'll start with Dr. Gilles Mueller. Oh, and please come up here.
Hi everyone, I'm Gilles Muller. I'm the Associate Dean for Research in the Office of Research. The Office of Research on campus, what we try to do is to serve as a point of contact for you when you have anything related to your RISCA, by RISCA, research, scholarship and creative activity questions, or if you are not sure who to ask your questions, contact us and we will work with you. But at the same time, you also work with any of you on your grant writing proposals.
Hi everyone, my name is Raj and I'm the Senior Director for the Office of Sponsor Programs at the Research Foundation. We're primarily involved in submitting grants and proposals with federal agencies, state and local agencies, and we're a one-stop shop which will help you through the proposal stage to actually managing your awards and helping you with the closeout. Happy to be here, and it's nice to see so many new faces.
Hello, my name is Brenda Swan, and I am a member of the Office of Sponsored Programs team. I am the manager of Information Services, and we support your efforts by helping you to find funding for your research. So you'll hear a lot more about the project life cycle as we go, but we kind of follow what you provide as a second step in looking for funding to support your research.
Yeah, you're closer.
So, my name is Michelle Smith. I am part of the Tower Foundation in University Advancement, and while the Research Foundation supports efforts to look for public funding, our office works with you to secure, to identify and secure private funding. So philanthropic support that may come from foundations largely, and perhaps philanthropic support from corporations. So I'm one of the 2 corporate and foundation relations officers focused on foundations at the Tower Foundation.
I'm Paul McNamara. I also work at Corporate Foundation Relations with University Advancement. So sometimes we toggle between University Advancement and Tower Foundation. Tower Foundation is the technical 501c3 nonprofit that submits the grant. University Advancement is the development office on campus, so individual development, corporate and foundation relations. Those are the 3 main sources of philanthropy on campus, as well as alumni relations and advancement services. So Tower Foundation sits within that. And before, I worked for 5 years at the Research Foundation, so I have a sense of understanding of how that process works. And you're going to see from this actually exercise today that the process is very, very similar, with the exception of some of the finer details that go into it. And also, everything's really driven by the sponsors, so the format and everything else, which we'll get into.
Okay. Paul. Okay, so it's a lot of people, and there's a lot of units on campus. If there's one thing to remember, you can always go to Gilles in the Office of Research. If you're not sure whether you should talk to Paul or Michelle or Raj or whom, just ask Gilles. He's sort of the point of contact, and he can direct you to the right person for whatever you need. Okay, and I'm Amy Dendrati. I'm a professor in the School of Social Work. I serve as the Associate Dean for Research for the College of Applied Sciences and Arts, and I'm directing the University Grants Academy, and part of what I'm doing this year is doing this fall series of workshops, which is for the whole campus community. Okay. So we want to talk a little bit about where this piece of the grant writing process, this proposal summary, fits within a larger context. So Raj is going to talk a little bit about the grant proposal lifestyle.
Okay.
Life cycle.
It could be a
I use lifestyle.
It is a lifestyle. So
That's a perfect word.
it is. So welcome to this new lifestyle. We hope you'll have fun with it. So primarily, the initial step to this life cycle is generating your idea. So keep in mind, when you're generating the idea, it should be in line with the mission of the university, strategic planning with the university. It needs to sync up. And you also want to think about details even early on. Think about, what are you trying to achieve? What cost may be involved with that? What sort of resources would you need? You may even start thinking about release time. Do you need use of facility? Is there some collaborations, whether it's internal or external? So these are thoughts you should have when you're generating your initial idea. Then once you're ready with the idea, you want to make sure your idea is in sync with what the funder you're targeting is willing to provide, because there has to be a link up there as well. And then depending on which funder you're targeting, you can work with the research administrators over at Research Foundation or at Tower that can make the connections for you, whether it's through funding agencies, program announcements, or RFPs. And I'm the next step. Sorry, it's kind of developing and submitting your proposal. So step 3. So this would be, again, working with your research administrator on either one of the 2 auxiliaries to kind of reviewing the RFP. You can never start too early. Communicate not only with your deans and chairs, with your research administrators. Identify roles and responsibilities. Agree to a timeline. Make sure everybody knows what they're responsible for. and kind of stick to that plan. And there are many tools available for putting together budgets, bringing it all together so then it could be submitted. And again, realize the submission process, there's a lot of compliance requirements. There's approvals, approvals from you, the PI that's submitting it. Your chair and dean have to sign off on it. If you're working with human subjects, IRB needs to sign off on it. There's many compliance requirements that has to go before we actually submit. So once the grant is submitted and you're successful, it's about to be funded, that's when the award negotiation can happen. So depending on which agency submitted it, Tower or Research Foundation would negotiate on your behalf and the university's behalf to comply with the terms and conditions and also to accept the award. So you can start actually working on it. Award setup is basically meeting with your grants administrator, getting an account number set up. They'll introduce you to payroll resources. Maybe it's purchasing to make those process occur. It's also setting up due dates for deliverables, progress reports, technical reports. So all of that is set up so we can hit the ground running. Again, communicate is the thing I would say. Managing your project award, again, monthly reports from either Tower or from Research Foundation to kind of give you a snapshot of what your account balance is, and projections to see how your funding will go through the life cycle of that budget year, or if it's a project year. And again, working with HR, it may be working with AP, procurement to manage your needs. And then finally closing out, making sure all deliverables have been met, working through all the closeout reports. If there's no additional funding, helping you work with HR to, and I hate to use the term terminate project staff. Is it 60 days required notice to lay off individuals if there's no other funding? So providing you that support, that service. And that's about it in a nutshell.
So this piece, the proposal summary, as you can imagine, is a piece that happens really early on. It can be helpful here and here. So that's what we're going to talk about next. Why bother to do this? So one basic reason is that it will help you clarify what your ideas are. I was just in a meeting the other day listening to somebody very smart talk about something very complicated. He talked for like 10 minutes. And then I said, do you think you could write that down? And he thought for a minute, he said, but then I'd have to really understand it. Like, exactly. That would help me understand it. And the reality is that when you write things down, the act of writing helps you clarify. So it's a way, it's your first step. It's all in your head until it's actually down on paper. So it's the first step for idea capture and clarification. Another important purpose of the proposal summary is for communication. And as you're in the process of writing a grant proposal, you're going to need and want to communicate with a lot of different parties. So you may be interested in finding collaborators, and this is a very easy thing to share with them about what it is you're hoping that they'll collaborate with you on. It's also useful for funding searches. So I'm going to turn it over to Brenda to talk a little bit about what she might do with something like this if you were to share it with her.
So your proposal summary or a clear description of your research idea becomes a really critical communication tool for us at the beginning of your process. So the way we support you is a few different ways. So one is through our funding alerts. So your communication tool or your proposal summary tool then is going to communicate to us how we can best serve you through the funding alerts that we send out. So, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail if in case you're not familiar with the funding alert system, it's an email notification that comes directly to your mailbox based on information that you've provided on a daily basis that's targeted at your research. So that's one way. The other way is through custom or individualized searches. So that is done on as schedules permit, and as resources permit. But we then are able to conduct an individualized search for you, either internally or upon request to GRC, the Grants Resource Center. So again, your description is going to give us the best and the most targeted approach to finding those resources that may be available to fund your research. And then the other is to help us to provide you with the guidance that might be helpful to you on how you can use resources, other resources that are available to conduct a search on your own.
And Paul and Michelle, do you want to talk about how you might use this document to help them find funding?
Sure. So it's very similar to what Brenda said. The Research Foundation, for those of you that don't know, in the CSU system, where the particular foundation, we separate the money compared to the UC. So everything goes into UC, it goes to the general fund. In the CSU system, we separated it out, so auxiliaries, the only thing the CSU can accept is tuition money. So bookstore, Spartan Shops, extramural money, which is this, has to go through an auxiliary. So they've been around since 1932. We've been around since 2005. We separated the philanthropy in 2005, so that's why, but we're both auxiliaries of the university. So their system is much more sophisticated and has been around longer, as I said. So they have an information systems, information services, which we do not. However, having said that, what we use this summary for, when you send it to Michelle or myself, and there's also 2 other people on our team, it gives us a sense of what you're looking for. So there we sort of commit it to our memory. We are probably going to develop that as things go on. The university went through its first campaign for 7 years. In another year or 2, we're probably going to go into another campaign. Our office is going to grow with the new president, and so we use that, however, to kind of get a sense of what it is you're looking for, because each of us has our own portfolio of 25 to 50 foundations that we know of. There are 75,000 foundations in the United States. So once we get into other workshops in the fall and then in the spring, we'll show you how to do some searches and how to input some of those keywords, because while there's a keyword system for funding alerts at the Research Foundation, there's also keyword systems in these national databases, and you can do a lot of the searches yourself, and we will too. But having a sense of what it is that you're going to apply for will give us an understanding of where to look.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, and then Raj, would you be willing to talk about the use of this for talking with, say, program officers at some of the federal funders?
Sure. So what you want to do is keep it brief, keep it concise, and also you want to do your homework. If you're going to reach out to a program officer, my advice to you would be try to plan it when it's not around a agency deadline that they may be dealing with, because they probably don't have time to talk to you. But it's always good to probably send a quick email with your questions and your introduction and requesting time to speak with the program officer. If it's related to a particular announcement, you may want to give a brief summary of what your research area is, what your interests are, to see, so they can read that and be prepared to talk to you. You also want to do that at end stages. If you've received the reviewers' feedback and comments, at that point too, I would encourage you to call the program officer and say, I got a pretty good remarks, good scoring. How do I make it excellent for the next time around? I think that's a good communication strategy that I would recommend.
Thank you. So it's useful for communicating with collaborators. Hi, come on in. I'm sorry, I think we are out of chairs, but maybe Gilles, you can either use that table or maybe you could fit one more in. Hopefully the fire marshal won't come by. Speaking with collaborators, doing funding searches, communicating with program officers, but also there's some internal communication that these proposal summaries can be very useful for. In our college, in CASA, we have a requirement that if a faculty member is working on a proposal, that they submit something like this in advance to their chair and dean prior to going through routing, which is the submission process through the auxiliaries, so that the chair and the dean have an awareness that this is coming down the pike. And if they have any questions at all, like, What about students? Are you paying for those? Or what about release time? And all those kinds of questions. What about overload or match? They can ask you those questions before the routing starts. So this is a very useful thing to do 2 or 3 weeks before you're submitting, to share this with your chair and your dean, so everybody's on board about what you're planning, what's in your project, and everybody approves it before you even start the routing process. And then, Jill just stepped out, but can you talk about the internal limited submissions? It's not. Yeah, there's an actual a specific format that they have to use for that. Is that right?
Yes.
I can talk about it.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
If you're ready, fire.
You're up.
So some, are you talking about limited submittals or internal grants?
Limited
I think we're talking about limited submissions, where sponsoring agencies only allow a certain number of submissions per institution. And there is a process that's involved to determine which proposals go forward. So, and part of that is submitting the request to the Office of Research for a review of the limited submission or the letter of intent. And then you would receive a decision from the Office of Research on who is to move forward with their proposal. And Jill's just stepped back in.
So Jill, you
So
stepped
the
out right at your...
limited submittal process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I need to go with that?
I think Brenda did a pretty good job.
I was just filling in.
Oh, you did it?
No,
Okay.
please.
Sorry. So yeah, so in fact, yeah, when you have to do that, it's important that some grant opportunities, we as a campus, we can only submit maybe 1 or 2 applications. So what happens in this case, we have an internal review of application. There is a request that is sent out to all of your chairs and deans, that they may forward it to all of the faculty and staff in their colleges. Like today there was one for NSF MRI where we are limited. So in fact then what you need to do is to contact either the Research Foundation or the Tower Foundation, depending where it is coming from, saying that you have an interest, and there is a brief application that you have to fill out with the information about what you plan to submit, and then there will be a review committee that will evaluate all of those applications and make a recommendation on who may be able to submit a proposal to this limited submission funding opportunity.
Thanks, Jill.
You're welcome. Sorry, I was looking
No
for
problem.
something.
And then second to last thing you can do with a proposal summary, can you talk about that? That's how you use it for budget development?
So, yes, I can talk about that. So, budget development, again, as I mentioned before, when you're thinking about your idea, think about what costs may be actually involved in it. And the reason it's so critical, if your grant is funded, there's restrictions in terms of what rebudgeting requirements are, what you're actually able to move between different line items. So try to think of budgetary costs. Be as realistic as you can be, and plan it out that way. And again, with the budget development, work with your research administrator. They have a lot of tools to put together budgets for different agencies. No one budget is alike. Every sponsor has different categories. I think the key is you're going to have direct costs and you're going to have indirect costs. So direct costs are directly correlate to the project, and indirects are there to support the infrastructure. And again, on the direct costs, it's personnel and non-personnel costs. So again, I can't emphasize enough, be realistic with your budget so you've got your costs covered.
Thanks, Raj. So basically, our next workshop, if you're aware of our series, and I have a handout to give you at the very end, the next one is on budget development. But you have to have some notion of what you're doing, hopefully a fairly clear notion to work from. So if you're wanting to do a budget this semester, this is a great first step, getting clear about what it is you want to do so you know what it is you need to fund. And then lastly, the use of this is that it can be expanded into a formal letter of intent. And before Paul talks about what a letter of intent is, I just want to mention that, hi. Some of the terminology is similar. Sometimes the same words are used to talk about different things. So NIH has a letter of intent that is only basically an email saying, I intend to submit this grant. It doesn't necessarily communicate anything about the content of your project. So that's their use of the terminology. Internally, we use that to talk about the limited submissions opportunities as well. And so now Paul's going to talk about the letter of intent as it refers to a submission to a private funder as the first step in that process.
And exactly that's what it is. So the problem challenge is in the United States, there's limited amount of money both publicly and privately. So now more and more federal and even public, state, city, they want to get a sense of how many people are going to apply. So they ask you for a letter of intent. Oftentimes it's just a summary. You can imagine it's the elements we're going to go into next that go into a project summary. So a lot of these elements and a lot of these terms are synonymous with each other. Most foundations now ask for a letter of intent. Certainly the larger foundations, Ford, Carnegie, Mellon Foundation, Kellogg, etc. And most of them have drop-down boxes with very limited characters because they just get thousands and thousands. You can imagine with all the nonprofits, it doesn't matter if they say, you know, no churches, this is not for social services, this is not for an endowment, it's not for capital, whatever it is, they apply anyway. And so the letter of intent is a way of vetting that out, so to make sure that it aligns with their mission and the goals and the scope and the criteria especially. So a lot of foundations are limited to region. You can only apply from this state, you can apply from this county, your grandfather had to have fished in this fishing hole, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's amazing some of the criteria, right? So now you get something from Alaska, but the foundation's in Maine, it's not going to work. But people, you know, that's what a letter of intent is. It's most of these elements that are on the next page.
And it's actually a great thing because it saves you, the PI, from wasting a lot of time and energy creating a proposal that they were never going to fund.
Yeah, and if you can answer all the elements of a letter of intent, the summary next, you can take that in 1 page or 2 pages and go to 5 to 10 to 20 to 50 pages. It's a matter of explicating those categories. That's all, you know, you're going to add data, you're going to add a lit review, you're going to add increased methodologies, you're going to add graphs, tables, et cetera, and we'll show you how to do that in these other workshops.
Okay. Just to know, there's one more chair that anybody could squeeze into up here. Okay, so regardless of whether you're interested in foundation funding or NSF funding or you're not sure yet, there's some common elements that generally go into something like the proposal summary. So I'm just going to run through them very quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Raj for a 5-minute fleshing out of any of that content, and then over to Paul or Michelle to do the same from the private side. So first, you want to talk about the significance of your project. Why is it important? Why is the funder going to care about it? How does it fit with their priorities or the major concerns of our society? Why is this an important problem? Then you want to describe the issue itself or the problem itself that you're tackling. You want to describe the particular aims of your project, what you're hoping to accomplish, how you're going to go about doing that, your methodology. And then resources, which is about what are the capacities at hand in terms of your knowledge and expertise or the resources at the university or whatever it is that mean that you have the ability to accomplish what you say you want to do. Oftentimes, an evaluation of a project is required, so you would talk about that. Are those required for research projects? It depends, sometimes they are. And then the budget, how much you might need to do the work. So I'm just going to turn it over to Raj, and if you want to flesh that out in the context of the public
Okay.
funds.
So I think, as Amy said, the key is this summary, this introduction, kind of sets the tone of your proposal. You want to write it in a way that it's not geared toward experts, but folks that are experts in your field, so that it should be readily understood by them. You also, other components you want to focus on would be, again, methodology, design, plan of action. You want to speak to that. You want to talk about how what you're proposing is in line with what the university goal mission is and how it correlates to what the request is. And some of the other things that from a research or from a federal funding perspective would be talking about dissemination. How is that data going to be disseminated? That's one component to keep in mind, and you may want to speak briefly to it. Or if you're requesting funds for a seed program, or it's going to continue, you may want to talk about future funding. How is this project going to be funded once this initial funding opportunity ends?
Great, thank you. Paul, do you want to, or Michelle, flesh out these ideas from the private funding?
Yeah, a lot of these are going to be the same whether you're going for private or public funding, but one of the interesting pieces with a private funder is that when you're explaining the statement of need, it really needs to be aligned with the funder. Now, if you're going for a private funder, you might be wanting to look at how to support teachers in helping them have their students do better in certain areas. The funder, they care about teacher professional development. So when you're describing the need, one of the things that's a little different is that you are really going to need to reflect back some of their language. So it may be the same concept, but they want to see that in your need. They want to understand your need, but they're a little bit different with some of the private foundations as opposed to kind of a standard language that might be across all NIH funding. Each funder has their own language. And the thing to keep in mind, the little catchphrase is that if you know one foundation, you know one foundation. Because each of them has their own view of the world and what they're wanting to support.
The only thing I would add to this, where people fall short, is your methodology. I have an idea, I want to change the world. I think it's going to cost about this much. How are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? How are you going to go about it? Lab research, whatever it is. So we did an analysis a number of years ago when I was at the Research Foundation on the number of proposals that were refused from the National Science Foundation. This was the #1 reason. The methodology was not clear. So it's got to be really super clear about what, because when it comes down to evaluation and assessment, they're going to tie that metric back to what it is you're going to do and how you're doing it. I'm going to do it this way, and this is how I'm going to...
Grants that went out from CASA to the NIH, and it was the same thing. Those that weren't successful, it was because it may have had a great methodology, but the...
So if we could just pause here for a second. What makes a great methodology section?
The question was, what makes a good methodology section? And again, we will be having other workshops that delve more deeply into the other major steps in writing a grant proposal, and one of them will be on drafting the narrative, and we can spend more time with that. But I think from what Paul and I just mentioned, the essential aspect is clarity. So, you know, if you're doing there's different kinds of rigorous studies depending on your discipline and you know what the funders aim for ideally. But the bottom line is, if they can't understand it, they're gonna not assume the best. So maybe if you have more specific questions about a particular funder or a particular discipline, and what would make a strong methodological section for that, I'll refer to Gilles.
So let me just throw in one thing there. So maybe you could just talk about quantitative and qualitative methods. Quantitative obviously are the most, so depending on whether you're social science or you know, core sciences or engineering would depend on what that is. There's also, you know, there are mixed methods, but when you think about research methods, for example, in your work that you did in graduate school, et cetera, do you want to jump in there, Gilles?
Well, I would say that, yeah, it's very important, and making sure that whatever you want to address, it's done in a way that a reviewer, and keep in mind sometimes when you have reviewers looking at your proposal, they may not have the complete expertise in your field. they are working in the same field, but they don't have all the expertise. So make sure that you have all of this information and that they can understand what you are doing. So it's very important at that level to do that.
Jill is going to...
There's actually something up here that would probably be appropriate for that.
I'm going to give this chair over here. Sorry, on camera.
I don't know where it's
Oh,
from, but
that's it. I think Gilles going to start one and I'll start one, but please be sure to complete the sign-up sheet. Okay.
Should I volunteer this over, Chair?
Yeah. Okay.
They're going to hate me.
So now, sorry for the small room. When we did this workshop last year, I think we had maybe a third of this number. So it's great to have so many folks come. And for our future workshops, we will probably find a different room.
We're hungrier for money this time.
Oh, there's just more of you too, which is great. Okay, so now that we've talked about the purpose of the summary, hopefully we've made a compelling case that this is a sensible, important step to take if you are beginning writing of a grant proposal. And so now we want to introduce a couple of different tools that you could use. And what tool you might want to use would depend on sort of where you are in your idea development. If you are like early stage, you've had this great idea kind of floating around for a while in your head, but you haven't actually put it down on paper, then those are the tools we're going to talk about first. We have two different tools for those of you in the early stage. And one is well suited for those of you who are not really linear thinkers, and that's this one. And then another one is often more useful for people who do tend to have more linear way of thinking. So I'm going to let Paul introduce both of these early stage tools.
Can we just go to the next slide and then we'll just come right back to this one? Ultimately, this is what you have to come up with. You have to put it in sequential, linear form. So, you know, I have yet to come across a grant application that says, please submit a video or a collage. Please submit a mind map of what you're thinking about doing. An infographic might work too. Haven't seen that. Have you seen that? No.
Not yet.
This is old school. This is what you have to come up with. Do I hit up to go back? However, getting there is not always that easy. So as a writing teacher and former writing student, there's this whole notion of clustering. And so some of you have seen this before, and this is basically what it is. Because we don't think linearly. We think in images. We think both linearly and in images and in abstracts. So this basically is your let's just take whatever subject. Did we have the example up here? I don't know.
I have it to show for people who want to use the tool.
So she does child welfare. So I used her example, would be in the middle, and then these are just ideas that come of that. So you would have whatever your idea is in the middle. That reminds me of this. That reminds me of this. You can have the categories on the side. What's my methodology? For now, I'm just going to put mixed methods or quantitative. Over here, dissemination. Well, I'm going to present at this forum. I'm in this discipline. There's this conference. I think that the local county welfare office could use this. I'm going to put maybe down there. Who are all the stakeholders, in other words, type thing. So this is just a tool to just get it out of your head and onto paper, and then you can start rearranging. This idea makes me, and it's not limited to this. We just put this up here to kind of give you an idea of where it goes, and then from there,
Just
this one? Oh, magic.
Paul, excuse me, quick question.
Sure.
Is dissemination, does that come under methodology?
No.
Or does that just come later in this whole process?
Methodology is how you're going to do it, and dissemination is once you do it, how are you going to get it out? So it's really, that's more of a federal thing, but some private foundations want it, you know, it's so what? So who is this going to impact? But in general, dissemination is more of a federal term, and it's about how are you going to disseminate this within the intellectual community or the scholarly community, you know, of what it is that you're studying. Are you going to present this at a conference? Are you going to publish with it? Are you going to convert this into a book? How are you going to impact it? Do you want to say more about dissemination at all, Raj?
Well, my question really went to what part of this preliminary proposal does it fall under?
Here.
It's a separate.
This part.
Can-
It's right, I'm not, sorry to
So
be blunt.
we have these tools to hand
Okay.
out so
Okay.
that you don't have to remember this and decipher it. If this is the tool you want to use, we have them to share if you
I see.
didn't receive them in advance.
And this, it comes somewhere after assessment and evaluation. It's just more how you're going to distribute it.
If I may add, often the dissemination aspect is at the end, and sometimes you have it in the what they call the data management plan, or what you expect to do. So it's often at the end of one of the last sections of the one.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
So Gilles just clarified for the sake of those watching this on video later on that that aspect of dissemination is sometimes incorporated into the data management plan, part of the official proposal. Okay, so this is one tool. Some of you receive these via email, but if not, we have them in hard copy. And then the second tool for an early stage thinker is this one, which is more for a linear thinker.
Nice thing about this is that I just adopted this from, I think it was actually an application for a letter of intent. But, and you handed these out, or you're going to
We
hand
have
these out?
them, yeah.
Answer the question, right? So in one sentence, describe your project. What are you going to do? Where? Who are you going to do it with? And most importantly, why? So the sort of journalism, who, what, when, where, why, how type things, right? How does the project fit your department and school goals? One sentence, phrase, etc. Just do this, answer all these questions. You pretty much have a letter of intent. You can just expand on it. Then when you go to meet with us, we'll say to you, okay, could you tell me a little bit more about what you mean about this? This doesn't seem super clear to me, etc. And so it's an iterative process. But this is, I use this in 100W classes, so all students have to take in their upper division a writing class in their subject, and some faculty ask me to come. So for example, in science, they want to do proposal writing, right? So, or in social science, or in humanities, creative arts, for example, they're going to go into the nonprofit world. Can I come and talk about grant writing? I give this to students to do just as an exercise type thing. And it's super, super helpful. So if you don't know, it kind of just steps you through each one of those processes.
Great.
Do you want anything more about that, Anna?
Okay, but maybe you're a little farther on. Maybe you've already got some of your ideas down on paper, and what you want is to structure it more appropriately for whatever funder you're interested in. So we have a couple of templates that are very simple. These are not official templates of any funder. They're just ways you might want to structure using those 6 or 7 primary characteristics of a letter of intent. You might want to put it in a language that the funders understand and use all the time. So in an NIH proposal, there's a specific aims page where you introduce and then you list the aims of the project, and then you have a summary paragraph. So it might make sense to do your communication with them using language that they are comfortable and familiar with. So in that, if it's that entity you're interested in communicating early on with, you might use this tool. If you're, anything else you want to add to that?
You're good.
Okay. For the NSF, similarly, you want to pull in all the important elements, those 6 things, but you want to structure it and use language that they're familiar with, that makes sense to them. So this is some headings and language from the NSF proposal summary page, which is required for NSF proposals.
Can I just say one quick thing about this? I use, because I did these federal grants for so many years, I use these 2 things oftentimes with private grants. So if you're going to apply to a private grant,
Statement on intellectual merit, statement on broader impact.
so for every summary in National, so you don't know, every application for National Science Foundation has a project summary page, and on that page you have to call attention to these 2 things. You have to call them out, you know, so you put the heading, and it could be 1 or 2 sentences, it's usually a paragraph each. For private foundations, especially broader impact is the return on investment. So this is what I'm going to do, but this language in National Science Foundation, if you look these up, they provide language to talk, language and categories on what they mean by broader impact. You know, the neighborhood, the municipalities, the nonprofits, the broader community, and then intellectual merits within the scholarship. But these are very, very helpful as concepts. They're not required, but they're very, very helpful, I think, I find. especially because they offer the language.
And then the third later stage tool that we have is a structure that you might use for a private foundation for a formal letter of intent. Do you want to?
Yeah, and I don't know that there's a huge amount to add, because you'll probably look at this and say, wow, there's a whole lot of things that just pull exactly from the summary, which is the case, because that's why the summary touches on those pieces. A letter of intent is going to provide the same amount of information, and then if you're invited to do the full proposal, again, you're just expanding on all of those details. You've got you've got your need, your problem or situation you're addressing is the need. You've got some goals, solutions, or outcomes. So you're just probably packaging them a little bit more specifically to exactly what the foundation is asking you. And for private foundations, usually the letter of intent is very prescriptive in terms of, we would like to see this, 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 and this. This is usually how it looks, but they'll give you exactly what they want, what the font, what the size is. Sometimes if it's not an online one, they're very specific about it.
Okay, I was going to ask that question, but you covered it. Okay, so those are the tools. So we've covered why you want to do it and what the tools are that we have to help you move forward with this. And we have way too many people in here to use this as a workshop space. Look at that, we're like right on time.
Can I just add one quick little thing?
Yeah.
A lot of this assumes, I think, that you're at the early stage of your proposal, but I know there are people in this room, because I know them, who have already done research and probably want to scale it up. And so that's a workshop in and of itself, and we talk about the writing workshop. But a lot of what we just went through can be applied to, depending on the sponsor, scaling something up. So I've done this much, but now I want to expand it. I have this many results, and that's great, because you have a lot more to start with, right? You know what your methodologies are. You just want to expand it and scale it and add another dimension to it. Now I want to see what its impact is on another region for immigrant, in high tech or something like that. So it's not, this isn't just about starting off.
Okay, so what the next step of this session involves is actually working to develop a proposal summary. So in order to do that, one, you have to decide, am I a early stage writer or a later stage, and then which tool makes the most sense for me. For several of these tools, we have some examples so you can see how other people have used them. What I'd like to have you do after you identify that and we can pass out the tools is have half of you go upstairs to 210, and Gilles can open it up for you and spread out there, and half of you stay here, and the folks in the room that can help you do this will be walking back and forth. And I just encourage you to just do a rough draft. No matter how basically crappy you think it is, it doesn't matter, because what you get the words down on paper, and it's so much easier to edit than invent. So take advantage of this time. I mean, we specifically structured this series in this way to create some work time. Even though if you're like me, all you want to do is go back to your office and close the door and write in private, it's so hard to find time. And together, we've found you an hour, right? So let's make use of this time to get your first thoughts down on paper. If you have any questions at all about methodology or whatever it is, whatever you need answered to move forward, just raise your hand or grab somebody who's in the room there. Raj or Brenda, Gilles, Paul, Michelle, or I will be coming back and forth, and just ask us and we'll try to answer the question or find somebody who can answer the question for you so that you can move on. And then we'll regroup here at 2:45. I want to tell you about an additional benefit that we want to provide to you, and give you the handout for the next sessions, and then that'll be it. So be sure to sign in, and we'll take a 3-minute break to give us time to transition and use the restroom, which is upstairs, second floor.
Do you guys have any just big questions right now before we launch? Was this helpful at all? Yeah, do you want to talk about, as long as everyone's together right now before you split up, Any big questions you want to talk about? Any pieces of this?
I have just one question that sometimes confuses me because, like probably many people here, I'm going to apply for the UGA. So we have a very specific proposal that is due on Monday, and that it's maximum 2 pages. So sometimes I'm trying to juggle what I already wrote for that,
Right.
what I should write for a letter of
Right.
intent or for just the summary of the proposal and all the information. So how could I don't even know where this question is going. So
I do.
I do too.
yeah, so you
She
can
does.
take it from there.
Yeah.
It's a really good, unclear question.
It's an excellent question, and we actually timed this because we thought this session might be useful for people who were applying to the UGA as at least a place to pull your thoughts together and think about the project you want to fund. Only a portion of that application is actually describing that project, so for that portion of the application, this work will be very useful. If you actually then get into the UGA, all these workshops will be helpful. If you go through each one, you will have a great head start for your work in the spring semester drafting a proposal. If you're not interested in the UGA or you don't get into the UGA, this is still incredibly helpful. And going through all these workshops, again, will put you in a good position to complete a proposal. And all the resources that we introduce you to in the UGA are here for everybody on campus. Gilles and the Research Foundation and Tower, everybody's still here to help you. So that just gives people a little more guidance and structure, but all the supports exist for everybody on campus. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other big questions before we break up?
Just other computers in 210 upstairs?
No, but we have pen and paper hard copy tools here for you to use. So if you have your laptop and you receive the materials in advance and you'd rather type, great, do that. If not, I have hard copy tools and hopefully have enough for everybody, and if not, we'll go run and make more copies.
Any question?
Well, it's not really a question, because I teach 100W in 3 different departments. And I just really like these forms for teaching our students. I mean, it's really clear, and I've gone to the series of writing proposals and everything. It's so complicated, like, you know, the PI, whatever. This is really simple.
Thank you.
I thought, yeah, I think, and then taking it to the next level where, like, we were to meet again with what we've drafted, using some of these on an individual basis.
You can have them, I'll send them to you, you can modify them.
No, I already printed them out as, no.
But I mean for your students, if you want to use
Yeah.
them, feel free.
Okay, so let's take a little break. During the break, let me know where you are and what tools you want, if any, and then if some subset of you can head upstairs to 210, following Gilles, there'll be a workspace up there. Come back here, 2:45.